successful and a holding again at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials insisted that this an isolated incident of the packet for anyone. But then, no, perhaps we will continue.
The file arrived long after midnight, dropped onto a desk by a clerk with hollow eyes and a gait that suggested he had already walked through too many human ruins. Whatever lived inside that envelope, he wanted no part of it. The package was thin and brittle, yellowed around the edges like it had soaked up the dust of forgotten rooms. It carried the smell of damp basements, old secrets, and something that had been aging for far too many years. On the front, written in a trembling hand that seemed afraid of its own message, was a single word: Madagascar. A place wrapped in fog and fables, a jagged shape on the far side of the world where the trees rise like the bones of ancient titans, and the shadows move with intentions no one dares to name. It's the kind of place that grinds explorers down and spits out whatever is left as legend. Inside the envelope waited a newspaper clipping from 1874, the New York World. Ink faded but still sharp enough to cut. The headline promised horror, the kind that crawls out of the earth and looks back at you with no hint of mercy. The man-eating tree of Madagascar. The byline belonged to someone calling himself Karl Liche, a drifter with a German name and no traceable past. His words painted a path deep into the island's heart, where a tribe called the Makoto waded among ancient roots and thicker fears. Liche wrote of how they guided him through a suffocating jungle into a clearing where the air hung heavy and the sunlight died before it ever touched the ground. There, rising out of the soil like a confession carved by nightmares, stood a tree that did not belong to the world of plants. Its leaves angled downward like knives ready to choose a victim. Its tendrils writhed in slow, listening curls as if waiting for a heartbeat to betray itself. The trunk pulsed with a rhythm that suggested something alive, something hungry, something planning the next breath it would steal. According to Liche, he watched the Makoto push a woman toward the thing. They moved with the quiet resignation of people carrying out a duty they had learned from generations of whispered fear. The woman did not scream. She didn't even fight. Her eyes were wide and hollow, as if whatever lived inside them had already stepped out and walked away. The tribe pushed her forward in a slow procession, the kind that feels ceremonial even when no one speaks a word. As she neared the tree, the air shifted. Liche said it felt like the jungle itself took a breath. The leaves along the creature's crown trembled, but not from wind. There was no wind. Not there. The clearing was too still, too locked in place, as if time had paused to watch. Then the plant stirred. He described tendrils that rose from the base, uncoiling with a fluid grace that should not have belonged to anything rooted in the earth. They lifted like living cables searching for heat, listening for the pulse that betrayed her presence. When she stepped inside their reach, they tightened with purpose, wrapping around her wrists, her ankles, and her waist. Liche said the woman hung in the air for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, suspended between the world she knew and the one waiting to swallow her. The tendrils pulled her upward, drawing her closer to the trunk where the bark split open in a widening crease. It pulsed like an exposed artery, red and wet, as if the tree had peeled itself apart to reveal the hunger inside. He claimed the sound that followed was not a scream, but a sharp exhale. The final gasp of someone giving up the fight. The trunk closed around her body slowly, methodically, as if savoring the act. Her body trembled, then slackened as whatever life she carried was drawn out of her, inch by inch. When the tree released her, she fell limp, drained. A husk, a pale echo of the person she had been moments before. He described it all with the kind of precision born either from terror or insanity. A tree that drank the living. A sacrifice given to something green and ancient. A ritual older than any map. Older than the name of the island. Older than the man who dared to write about it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dancing Toaster. It has been a while. It feels good to say that. It's been about 4 weeks since we dove into the weird and wonderful. 2 weeks of man-eating toaster and 2 weeks of rest and focusing on other things for a little bit. That massive two-parter on Islam and its evil founder were a lot. A lot of work goes into every episode of the show, but trying to get both of those episodes out and keep them under or around the 2-hour mark was quite the challenge. It probably should have been broken into smaller pieces and more parts, but to be honest, I didn't want to stretch it out that long. Thank you for all the wonderful feedback y'all gave me for those 2 episodes and the awesome reviews. It took a lot to make them, and it means a lot that so many learned so much from them. I was feeling a little burned out after completing that project, so like I said, took a break, focused on pastoral ministry, had a lot going on with that. I took some time to work on the Patreon exclusive show, the fictional one called The Toaster Files. I commend my brothers over at Nevermore Hollows. If you haven't checked them out, you really should. Great storytelling that inspires me, but it's not easy to do what they do. If you want to hear the new show, it's exclusive to Patreon and will remain so. Trailer for it is up on the Dancing Toaster YouTube channel. Wait a minute. Wasn't that supposed to be out like last month or something? Vinny, welcome back. What are you talking about? Welcome back like I went somewhere. I didn't go nowhere. You kicked me out.
You ain't the only one. I'm amazed anyone still listen to this nonsense without me around here.
Fellas, I'm sorry. I was just covering some sensitive stuff. We like to banter together, and I didn't want anyone to take it the wrong way or think I was treating those topics trivially. Look, it's all right. I already got the feds on my tail. I don't need to be on any other list, all right?
I still think they could have been better with my expertise.
So you're saying you want Muslims coming after you too?
No thank you. If it happens, it happens, but I'm certainly not going to slap the bee's nest like you did.
So you're saying I shouldn't have done those episodes?
No, don't put words in my mouth now. I'm just saying I'd rather it be you than me. I still got a lot of life to live.
Dr. Wright, we're the same age. No way, I thought Comb-Over was way older than you.
Now shut your mouth.
Now you know why I shaved my head. That receding hairline adds like 15 years. You ain't kidding.
Maybe I shouldn't have come back to this clown show.
Come on, Doc, don't be so sensitive. We're all balding. Hey, speak for yourself. Besides, you wouldn't want to miss today's episode.
Well, I do delight in proving Vincent wrong. It's been a while.
Nah, let him leave. Get out of here, you and your BTK haircut.
Why, I oughta...
Both of you, shut up. Now you know why I had to force you to take a month off. Anyways, I was about to do my thank yous until Dink and Doink interrupted. Thank you first and foremost to my toasties. They are the patrons on Patreon. This month, I want to give a special shout out to Sean. Thank you for becoming a toastie. I need all your help, folks. If you want to help like Sean is helping, you can become one of the toasties and support my work. $5 a month is all it takes. Enjoy early access, ad-free listening, and access to exclusives, specifically the new fictional show, The Toaster Files. The reason it is delayed once more is I did some major changes to the lore, which is why I missed my deadline. It required major rewrites, but I think it'll make the show better in the end. You guys know how much I love the X-Files, hence the Toaster File tag. Those familiar with the show know that it had major arcs that went throughout the entire show run, but in between there were Monster of the Week type cases that fleshed out the characters a little bit, took them to different places, did some crazy things. Toaster Files will be like that as well. My toasties also get to become part of the world that I'm creating. The fictional town that my investigators are based out of is called Ashwood Pines, and they are all citizens of the town. If you're new to the Toasties, please check out the group chats on Patreon. There you can tell me how you'd like to be included in this world. There's also a new tab where you can tell me what episode topics you want me to cover in the new year. Carly gave me about 6 months of material to talk about. Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. If you can't support monthly like them, or you feel led to support another way, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/The Dancing Toaster. If you prefer PayPal, you can do that too. If anybody wants to rep the Dancing Toaster around their city, head on over to the merch store, get some Dancing Toaster gear at thedancingtoasterstore.printful.me. If you wanted to get it before Christmas, you definitely missed that deadline, I think. The service that I use doesn't make the stuff until it's ordered. This way, they, nor I, have to sit on boxes of unsold merch. In any case, no matter what, know that I love you. I'm grateful to all of you and for all the many ways you support me and my work. As you can tell from the opener, today we're diving into a pretty old and pretty unknown case, the case of the man-eating tree of Madagascar. If it feels like it's coming out of left field, it's because it is. I wanted to cover something that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, and I needed a palate cleanser. So it's not a man-eating toaster episode, ironically, but it is something man-eating. It's interesting how that worked out. Anyways, the roots of the Madagascar man-eating tree legend can be traced to a single sensational article printed in 1874 in the New York World. The piece appeared under the name of a supposed German explorer named Karl Liche, although no such person has ever been located in legitimate expedition archives. In this report, Liche claims that he journeyed into the remote interior of Madagascar and encountered an isolated tribe called the Makoto. He described them as a people who lived in fear and awe of a monstrous carnivorous tree that required human sacrifice. According to the article, Liche witnessed a ritual in which the Makoto forced a young woman toward the plant. The tree is painted as a living engine of predation. Its leaves were not described as foliage, but as sharpened blade-like structures. Its tendrils were said to writhe and coil like serpents, each one capable of independent motion. As soon as the woman was pushed within reach, these tendrils allegedly lashed out, wrapped around her limbs and torso, and drew her upward toward the center of the plant. Liche claims that the trunk opened in a gaping cavity that pulsed and tightened, crushing and draining the woman until her body collapsed into a lifeless husk. This nightmarish portrayal captivated readers. Madagascar was still largely unfamiliar to most Westerners in the late 19th century. To the public, the island already carried an aura of danger, mystery, and strange wildlife. A story about a predatory tree seemed plausible to an audience eager for tales that blurred the line between science and spectacle. Long before anyone whispered about man-eating trees, nature had already proven something unsettling. Plants were not always passive. Some hunted. By the mid-19th century, Western science was coming to terms with the discovery that unsettled long-held assumptions about the natural world. Certain plants did not merely grow and wait. They trapped, they digested, they fed. In 1875, Charles Darwin published Insectivorous Plants, documenting species that actively captured and consumed living organisms. His work confirmed that carnivory was found in the plant kingdom. Plants could lure prey, immobilize them, dissolve them, and absorb nutrients from their remains. The idea alone was enough to rattle the Victorian imagination. Some of these plants were already infamous. The famous Venus flytrap snaps shut with mechanical precision triggered by touch. Sundews glisten with sticky droplets that entangle insects until they suffocate. Pitcher plants form deep, fluid-filled chambers where prey slowly slides in and never climbs out. And some species push the boundary even further. Nepenthes raja, a pitcher plant native to Borneo, grows large enough to trap and digest entire rodents. Frogs, lizards, and rats have been found dissolved within its chambers. The plant does not move quickly, but it does not need to. Gravity, slick surfaces, and digestive enzymes do the work. To a 19th century reader, this was explosive information. If a plant could eat trees, then frogs. If frogs, then rats. And if rats, why not something larger? The slope felt slippery. The jungle suddenly felt less like scenery and more like a participant. Add to this the strangler fig, a tree that slowly envelops other trees, choking them to death as it grows. Early travelers often described these trees as predatory, even murderous. Though they do not consume flesh, they look like executioners frozen mid-act.
Now let's be clear about something. None of these carnivorous plants hunt people. They simply ain't built for it. They don't have the strength to pursue prey, the strength to restrain it, or the physical structures to overpower something human-sized. What they do instead is far less dramatic, but far more specific. They rely on chemistry, not force, patience, not pursuit, and a scale of feeding that stops well short of anything resembling a person.
What are you talking about, Doc? That's what they do now. That's what we see in the textbooks, under lab lights, with the plants that have been poked, prodded, and classified to death. But we're talking about jungles here, old jungles, places that don't care about your categories. You're telling me nature figured out how to eat bugs, frogs, rats, and then politely stop because humans showed up with notebooks? Come on. You don't need speed if the prey walks to you. You don't need strength if the thing's already rooted in fear. And patience, that's exactly what a tree's good at. Some of them have been waiting longer than civilization.
Carnivorous plants don't eat meat because they're mean or ambitious, Vinny. They do it because they're growing in lousy soil, nitrogen-poor, mineral-starved environments. Bugs fit the bill. Frogs, sometimes. A rat if it gets careless. But a person, that's a logistical nightmare. Too big, too strong, too unpredictable. No selective advantage. You don't last if you get trampled, hacked apart, or burned down by the rest of the tribe the first time you eat one of them.
You both make some valid points, but for readers encountering these discoveries for the first time, Doc's distinctions were easy to miss. The fear came first. The details came later. This is the fertile soil where stories like Liche's took root. When explorers spoke of jungles that felt alive, when botanists revealed plants that fed on animals, when maps still had blank spaces, the idea of a tree that demanded blood no longer sounded impossible. It sounded like the next discovery waiting in the dark. And once that idea exists, it does not need to be true to be powerful.
Alright, can you hurry up and let me get to the problems with Liche's account?
It's true, there were many problems. Even in 1874, careful readers and naturalists noticed that Liche's tale contained serious inconsistencies.
Yeah, first and foremost, there's no historical or ethnographic evidence of a tribe called the Makoto in Madagascar.
According to who, though? According to which records? Written by who? For who? When? Because most of what we call ethnography comes from missionaries, colonial administrators, or guys passing through with notebooks and bad intentions. You really think every tribe wanted to introduce themselves and get cataloged like a butterfly? Whole peoples vanish without a footnote, Doc. They get wiped out, absorbed, renamed, or written off as rumor, especially if they're small, isolated, and sitting on something nobody wants public. No evidence usually just means nobody bothered to write it down, or what got written didn't survive. Besides, half the tribes we know today weren't recognized until somebody stumbled into them by accident. Lack of paperwork ain't proof of non-existence. It's proof the jungle keeps its own files. Now on that note, I want to pause on something very important because this exact argument has come up before in biblical and historical studies. There was a time when critics confidently said the Bible was wrong because it mentioned a tribe or people group that supposedly never existed. Over and over again, Scripture referred to the Hittites. They show up casually in Genesis, Exodus, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. Abraham buys land from them, David's inner circle includes Uriah the Hittite, Solomon trades horses with Hittite kings, and for a long time skeptics said all of that was fiction. Why? Because there was no archaeological evidence, no inscriptions, no cities, no empire. The conclusion for them was simple. If we cannot find them, they must not have existed. That conclusion turned out to be completely wrong. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeologists uncovered the ruins of Hattusa in modern-day Turkey. What they found rewrote ancient history. Thousands of clay tablets written in cuneiform, laws, treaties, royal correspondence, records of wars and diplomacy, an entire Bronze Age empire that had rivaled Egypt and Assyria. One of the most famous discoveries was the Hittite peace treaty with Egypt after the Battle of Kadesh. It is one of the earliest known international treaties in human history. Today, copies of it sit in museums, and the Hittites are no longer debated. They are a cornerstone of ancient Near Eastern studies. As is always the case, the Bible was not corrected by archaeology. Archaeology finally caught up to the Bible.
Now hold on there, hold on. That don't mean every tribe mentioned in every old account automatically existed. It don't mean the Makoto were real just because we got Hittites.
Well, but it does mean this. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when we are talking about remote regions, incomplete records, and cultures that may never have left durable remains. History has a habit of humbling certainty, and sometimes the file stays open a lot longer than anyone expects.
Well, I got something that'll shut the both of you up. No German explorer named Karl Liche appears in any European records, scientific societies, or travel logs.
Oh, well, I guess that settles it then. Case closed, Doc says, because Europe kept such good paperwork. Doc, with all due respect, explorers change names all the time. Pseudonyms, pen names, anglicized names. You think a guy wandering around colonial territories writing for newspapers was worried about his resume lining up with the Royal Geographic Society? Half of those expedition records are missing, misfiled, or sitting in some archive nobody's looked at since World War I. And that's assuming he wanted to be remembered. Sometimes the ones who see the worst things don't stick around to give lectures about it. No record doesn't mean no man. It just means no paper trail survived him. That is a fair point, Doc. Probably the strongest one you made so far.
What did I tell you? You needed my expertise.
Slow down just a little, though. The 19th century was full of freelance explorers, journalists, missionaries, and adventurers who never made it into official societies, especially if they weren't backed by a government or university. Newspapers didn't require credentials. They required copy. Newspapers were not primarily concerned with who you were. They were concerned with what you could deliver. Copy is a journalism slang for written content, stories, articles, material that could be printed. If a man came back from somewhere like Madagascar with a story terrifying enough to sell papers, nobody was exactly asking for his passport. So the lack of records raises a red flag, but it doesn't end the conversation. It just tells us we're dealing with something that lives on the margins, either of history or of imagination. What we have or don't have in this case tells us Karl Liche wasn't famous. It doesn't tell us he wasn't there.
All right, pump your brakes, I'll grant you that part. You're not wrong that newspapers printed all kinds of nonsense without checking a man's paperwork. That's just history. Sensationalism paid the bills. It still does. But here's where I gotta draw the line. Explorers might have changed names, writers might have used pen names, but they didn't vanish into thin air across every single record at once. No travel logs, no shipping manifests, no missionary correspondence, no colonial reports, not even second-hand mentions. When somebody actually goes somewhere dangerous and survives long enough to write about it, they tend to leave some fingerprints, even accidental ones. Somebody remembers them, somebody references them, somebody argues with them. But this feller, what do we get? Nothing. No arguments, no rebuttals, no confirmations. No rivals saying he's lying. No supporters saying he's telling the truth. Just silence. That's not what real explorers leave behind. That's what stories leave behind. And I'll say this too, if a man witnessed something as world-shattering as trees that eat people and he lived to tell it, he wouldn't have stopped at one newspaper article. He'd have written letters, given talks, tried to cash that nightmare in, baby. So yeah, no record don't mean no man. But no echoes, no trail at all. That tells me we're not looking at a forgotten explorer. Tells me we're looking at a forgotten writer.
Nicely said. I knew I kept you around for something. Don't encourage him. But he did make some good rebuttals. Not to mention, there is another serious problem with Liche's account that you're really not gonna like, Vinny. Don't tell me you're siding with him. Vinny, how many times do I have to tell you it's not about taking sides, it's about going where the evidence takes us. The biggest issue with Liche's story is one that only becomes clear once you understand who the Malagasy people are. The Malagasy are the indigenous inhabitants of Madagascar, and their culture is one of the most distinctive in the world. Linguistically and ethnically, they are not a single uniform group, but a blend of Austronesian settlers from Southeast Asia and African populations from the mainland. This unique origin produced a rich and highly structured system of oral tradition that preserves history, belief, and identity across generations. For centuries, the Malagasy transmitted knowledge without writing. Genealogies, sacred laws, taboos, historical events, and encounters with the supernatural were memorized, recited, and guarded communally. This system was far more than casual storytelling. Like many ancient peoples, it functioned as historical record, moral instruction, and spiritual framework. In many cases, Malagasy oral history preserved details more consistently than later colonial documentation. Within this tradition, nature holds deep spiritual meaning. Forests, mountains, and trees are often considered fadi, meaning taboo or sacred. Certain locations are avoided. Certain trees are protected. Some groves are believed to house ancestral spirits or serve as boundaries between the living and the dead. But this reverence does not take the form of feeding nature with human blood. This distinction matters greatly. Across documented Malagasy belief systems, sacrifice is directed towards ancestors or spiritual entities, but never vegetation. Even when animal sacrifice occurs, it is symbolic and regulated, tied to honor, remembrance, or reconciliation. There are no recorded traditions of ritual human sacrifice to plants of any kind, no myths of trees that consume people, and no warnings passed down about vegetation that demanded blood. Anthropologists and ethnographers who studied Malagasy culture recorded an abundance of supernatural beliefs. Spirits that misled travelers, cursed places that brought about sickness, and sacred forests that must not be disturbed.
What he's saying is if a practice as extreme as feeding humans to a carnivorous tree had existed, it would not have vanished without a single trace. It would have survived as a warning, a taboo, or forbidden memory. Instead, it don't appear at all.
All right. I hear what y'all are saying, I do, but this is where it always gets real convenient. You're telling me the Malagasy got this airtight memory system, that nothing big ever slips through the cracks, that if it happened, it had to survive in story form forever. But cultures don't just preserve things, they also bury things, especially ugly stuff. You're talking about taboos, fadi, things they don't speak about, things you don't repeat, things you don't teach the kids unless you want trouble following your family for generations. What if the reason there ain't a story about a man-eating tree is because the rule was don't talk about it? Not as a warning, not as a myth, not ever. And let's not pretend colonialism didn't bulldoze a whole lot of memory while it was at it. Missionaries show up, administrators show up, anthropologists start asking questions. You really think people volunteered the darkest, most shameful thing their ancestors ever did? Especially if they believe saying it out loud might wake something up. So yeah, maybe there's no story, or maybe the story was cut out, scrubbed clean, or locked behind silence because some things aren't meant to be remembered, they're meant to be avoided. I'm not saying Liche's right. I'm saying the quiet don't always mean nothing happened. Sometimes it means everybody agreed to forget it.
Now hold on, Vinny, this ain't me saying cultures never forget. Of course they do. Loss happens, trauma happens, silence happens. But that ain't what we're looking at here. The reason this absence matters is because Malagasy oral tradition didn't just preserve the big stuff. It preserved the small stuff, the local stuff, the strange stuff that barely anybody outside a single valley ever needed to know. They remembered minor spirits tied to one hill, taboos tied to one tree, stories warning people not to cross one stream at night. That kind of detail don't survive by accident. So when I say there's no story of a man-eating tree, I ain't arguing from ignorance, I'm arguing from consistency. If a ritual this violent and this central had existed, it wouldn't have vanished clean. It would have left some kind of fingerprints, a warning, a forbidden name, a place nobody goes to, something. But we don't get that. And that tells me something important. Not that the Malagasy forgot it, but that it didn't start with them to begin with. This story don't sound inherited, it sounds imported. Dropped in from the outside by somebody looking in, not somebody living there. So yeah, silence can mean suppression, but it can also mean the story never belonged to the people it got pinned on, and in this case, that silence lines up too clean to ignore.
When you do slow this story down and look at what it is actually claiming, the problems become obvious very quickly. The biology simply does not work. The plant Liche describes would need abilities that plants simply do not have. Plants do not have muscles, so they cannot suddenly grab, squeeze, or lift something the way an animal can. They do not have a nervous system, so they cannot sense danger, make decisions, or coordinate movements in real time. They also do not have the internal energy systems required to overpower, kill, and digest something as large as a human being. Even actual carnivorous plants work in very limited ways. They do not attack, they wait. A Venus flytrap snaps shut only after repeated contact. Pitcher plants rely on slick surfaces and gravity to make small animals fall in. Sundews slowly trap insects with that sticky secretion. Once the prey is caught, digestion happens gradually through enzymes over long periods of time. Nothing about it is instantaneous. These plants are designed for small insects, sometimes frogs or rodents. Jumping from that to a full-grown human is not a small step. It is an entirely different category of life not seen in our world. That alone should have raised serious doubts about the story, but to understand why it did not, you have to understand the time period. 19th century newspapers did not operate the way journalism claims to operate today, but the difference is not as flattering as people like to pretend. Back then, papers were locked in fierce competition for readers, and sensational stories sold far better than careful ones. Editors wanted headlines that grabbed attention, especially dramatic reports from distant and unfamiliar lands. Accuracy was secondary to impact. If a story stirred fear, wonder, or outrage, it did its job. You thought social media did that? No, it's always been this way. Verification was often minimal. Sending someone to confirm a claim across an ocean was expensive, slow, and usually pointless from a business standpoint. If the setting was remote enough, there was little risk of being contradicted or corrected, and even if doubt surfaced later, the paper had already sold its copies. What has changed is not the incentive structure, but the speed and scale. Modern journalism likes to present itself as more disciplined and ethical, but the same pressure exists, and the internet has magnified it tenfold. Clicks replaced coin, outrage replaced curiosity, sensation still outperforms restraint. Stories that trigger emotion spread faster than stories that ask readers to slow down and think. In that sense, the Victorian press was not an anomaly, it was an early version of a problem that never went away. When attention is the currency, truth is always tempted to take shortcuts. And when the story comes from a place most people will never see for themselves, those shortcuts get even shorter. So exotic locations acted like a shield. Most readers had no way to check whether a jungle in Madagascar really contained a monstrous carnivorous tree. That uncertainty allowed fact, exaggeration, and outright fiction to blend together. A writer could present imagination as eyewitness reporting and be rewarded for it. At the same time, readers were already primed to believe these stories. To many people in the West, jungles were not just forests. They symbolized danger, chaos, and the unknown. They were places where the rules of civilization supposedly broke down. A story about a predatory tree did not feel out of place in that mental picture. It felt like confirmation. So the real mystery is not why the story fails scientifically. It clearly does. The real question is why it works so well, and the answer is very simple. It told people what they already believed about the unknown world, and it did so in a voice that sounded official enough to be trusted. As the story of the so-called Madagascar man-eating tree circulated through American and European papers, naturalists, missionaries, and ethnographers began to take notice. Many of them had spent years studying the island's environment and people, and they quickly realized that Karl Liche's report did not match anything known from legitimate fieldwork. Our good doctor already presented the first major problem investigators confronted, and that is the identity of Karl Liche himself. When researchers attempted to locate references to him in German expedition records, scientific society memberships, travel logs, or colonial administration archives, they found nothing. Not a single credible source documented a German explorer by that name traveling to Madagascar, or anywhere else for that matter. There were no colleagues, no publications, no maps, and no correspondence. The absence was so total that it became an immediate red flag. A person who supposedly witnessed a groundbreaking natural discovery should have left at least some trace in academic or geographic circles. Ethnographers who had cataloged Madagascar's many tribes and subgroups also found no mention of the Makoto people. As mentioned previously, Madagascar has an unusually well-preserved oral culture, and tribal identities are deeply rooted. A group as supposedly distinctive as the Makoto, especially one with unique rituals of man-eating trees at the center of their spirituality, would have been recorded somewhere in Malagasy oral history, missionary notes, language studies, or anthropological reports of some kind. Instead, the name appears nowhere outside of the 1874 newspaper story. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Madagascar became a major destination for botanists because of the island's extraordinary level of endemic plant life. Explorers collected specimens from forests, marshes, mountains, and coastal zones. If a large predatory plant with serpentine tendrils had existed, especially one requiring human sacrifice, it would have been the most extraordinary botanical discovery of the century. Yet no such organism ever appeared. Botanists familiar with carnivorous species pointed out that true carnivorous plants rely on slow chemical mechanisms, not rapid muscular action. The idea of a plant gripping, constricting, lifting, and immediately draining a human being contradicts every known biological principle. The more the story was examined, the more it clashed with scientific reality. But the final blow came in 1948 when science writer Willy Ley undertook a detailed investigation of the legend. Using archival material and period newspaper collections, Ley traced every version of the tale back to one man, Edmund Spencer. He was a journalist known for publishing sensational travel stories that blended imagination with hints of exotic geography. Ley discovered Spencer authored the original article. Spencer had a reputation for dramatizing or inventing encounters in unexplored lands, confident that few readers could challenge him. Ley concluded that the entire story was not the work of an explorer documenting a new species, but of a writer constructing an exciting narrative for a newspaper eager to boost circulation. The supposed eyewitness, the tribe, the ritual, and the plan itself were products of fiction presented as reporting.
Oh, come on, man. That can't be the end. Especially since we ain't looked at nothing in like a month. How did the story survive 3/4 of a century then?
This thing stuck around as long as it did for a handful of pretty simple reasons. We already talked about a major one. Madagascar was about as far from familiar as you could get from Western readers. Folks didn't have the background or context to push back. If you tell someone something wild about a place they'll never see, most of the time they'll just shrug and assume it must be true. Second, newspapers back then had no problem dressing stories up a little. Travel tales were expected to be exciting. You know I'd point this out eventually, but adventure sold. If the facts needed stretching to keep a reader hooked, that wasn't seen as a flaw. It was seen as good business. Then you had early cryptozoology writers and pulp authors come along later, picking the story up secondhand and repeating it like it was established fact. Nobody bothered to chase a source. They just copied it, polished it, passed it along to the next generation.
And that is uncomfortably true, and sadly what happened with early cryptozoology writers and pulp authors is almost exactly how social media works today, just faster and louder. Back then, one sensational story would get printed. Later writers would encounter it in a book, a magazine, a newspaper clipping. Instead of going back to the original source, they assumed it had already been vetted. They treated repetition as verification. Each retelling added polish, confidence, and detail, even though no new evidence had been added. Over time, the story felt established simply because it had been repeated so often. Social media runs on the same fallen engine. A claim gets posted. It is dramatic, strange, or emotionally charged. People share it not because they've checked it, but because it provokes a reaction.
The next person encounters it already framed as something people are talking about. Screenshots and vertical videos replace sources. Threads replace footnotes. Likes and shares replace credibility. Very few people click through to the original claim. Fewer still ask where it came from. Each repost strips away uncertainty and adds confidence. Captions shift from "I heard" to "Did you know" to "They don't want you to know." The story gets cleaned up, shortened, made more viral, but it never gets more true. Algorithms reward this behavior. Ask psychopaths like Candace Owens. Content that triggers fear, outrage, or wonder spreads faster than content that explains or qualifies. Just like Victorian editors rewarded spectacle because it sold papers, modern platforms reward engagement because it sells attention. Accuracy is not punished, boredom is. So the same process happens. Secondhand repetition becomes assumed fact. Lack of sourcing gets hidden behind popularity, and by the time someone asks for evidence, the story feels too familiar to question. That is why old hoaxes never really die, they just migrate. First from newspaper to pulp book, then from pulp book to cryptozoology guide, now from blog to TikTok to podcast clip to comment section. The medium changes, the mechanism does not. In both cases, the danger is not that people lie, it is that people repeat without checking, and repetition has always been one of the most convincing illusions of truth humans have ever invented.
And we also pointed out that you can't ignore the timing of everything. This was right when science had started uncovering genuinely strange plants, carnivorous ones, fly traps, sundews, pitcher plants.
Precisely. These were real things that really did eat other living things. So when somebody came along claiming a plant took a step further, folks were already halfway there mentally. It didn't sound reasonable, but it now sounded possible. By the time serious researchers went back and pulled the thread, the story was already woven into popular culture. Once that happens, facts have a hard time catching up. That's why you still see this thing pop up today on lists of mysterious plants, usually stripped of context and history, treated like an unsolved puzzle instead of what I believe it actually is. Once a story gets rooted in the imagination, it doesn't need evidence anymore. It just needs to be repeated. The 19th century was a time of rapid discovery. New species were being documented regularly, and carnivorous plants themselves were a recent fascination. The idea that nature still held undiscovered wonders seemed entirely reasonable. Readers were primed to believe that something even more dramatic could be waiting in an untouched forest. The Madagascar myth fit perfectly into this mindset. Many writers produced travelogues that mixed factual geography with imagined encounters. This hybrid style allowed them to craft compelling narratives while maintaining the appearance of serious reporting. Some authors openly admitted to embellishing, others, like Edmund Spencer, left the boundary between fact and fiction intentionally vague. Newspapers rarely challenged these pieces because they generated profit. The goal was readership, not documentation. Victorian culture also had a pronounced appetite for the macabre. Gothic literature, spiritualism, and horror were immensely popular. A story that combined botanical horror, ritual sacrifice, and an isolated tribe was irresistible. It touched on multiple fascinations at once. The idea of nature turning predatory carried a primal shock value. In many ways, the man-eating tree story was perfectly engineered for its audience. It was dramatic, frightening, and meticulously described, and it played into every cultural expectation. But if it was all made up, how did it survive into today? Well, that's a fair question, Vinny. Despite being traced to a single 19th century fabrication, the Madagascar man-eating tree refuses to disappear. It continues to circulate in cryptozoology texts, paranormal websites, classroom folklore units, and even pseudo-scientific documentaries. Several powerful forces keep the legend alive long after its origins were exposed. Stories that linger usually do so because they stir something primal. The concept of a tree that devours a human being is both familiar and alien. Everyone knows what a tree looks like, so the mind has a foundation. The horror enters when something familiar becomes predatory. That contrast creates a vivid, unsettling image that is easy to remember and even easier to retell. The original description of serpentine tendrils, spear-like leaves, and a crushing trunk reads like something pulled from a nightmare. Once such an image is introduced, it has its own momentum. Facts rarely erase a mental picture that strong. And as noted previously, myths endure most easily when they are set in places that the average person has never seen and probably never will see. Madagascar retains a reputation as remote and biologically unusual. Even today, the island contains species found nowhere else in the world. People associate the place with the strange and the undiscovered, which makes them more willing to believe that an extraordinary plant might exist there. When a hoax is tied to a location that feels mysterious, the mystery itself becomes part of the fuel that keeps it alive. Throughout the 20th century, writers of cryptozoology handbooks and paranormal guides recycled older material without verifying sources. Many of these books repeated the Madagascar story as if it were real, field testimony from a lost explorer. As these books circulated, they introduced the myth to new audiences who were unaware of its journalistic origins. Television programming later amplified the cycle. Shows that specialize in mysteries, unexplained creatures, and strange phenomena often reference the myth because it fits their narrative style. Even when such programs mention skepticism, they still present the core imagery, which keeps the legend in circulation. I'm guilty of that. We also can't ignore that legends that claim to reveal hidden truths or suppressed discoveries always attract attention. People naturally resist the idea that the world is fully mapped and fully understood. This is not inherently a bad thing. A myth like the man-eating tree promises an alternative reality just beyond the reach of mainstream science. This creates an emotional hook. Even if someone knows the story is unreliable, they may still enjoy imagining a world where such things could be real. Real carnivorous plants and unusual forms of plant behavior make the myth seem plausible to casual readers. As we pointed out today, certain pitcher plants can digest small vertebrae. Sundews can trap larger insects through sticky tentacles. Strangler figs can envelop entire trees. When bits of real science sit beside exaggerated fiction, people sometimes blur the line between the two. The existence of real plant predators gives the legend just enough biological flavor to feel believable to those unfamiliar with botany. The modern day makes things even worse, I fear. Information spreads through headlines, summaries, and viral images rather than through careful reading. A dramatic story about a murderous tree captures attention instantly. Articles and videos are often shared without checking accuracy, and heaven help us from what AI is doing and is going to do. As a result, debunkings rarely travel as far or as fast as the original claims. The myth is simple, dramatic, and easy to visualize. Debunking it requires paragraphs. In the digital age, simplicity continues to win. Finally, the legend has become part of a broader cultural memory. It appears in adventure fiction, fantasy games, folklore compilations, and horror stories. Even when writers reinvent the plant, the root myth remains. A fabricated report from 1874 has evolved into an archetype of the predatory jungle, fueling new creative works that keep the idea alive. Once a myth becomes a trope, it no longer needs factual support. It survives because it continues to function as a story. All right, I hear what y'all are saying, I do, but I still got a major problem. We're pretending this is just one single weird story floating around all by itself out there, but it ain't. You still got South America and Central America talking about the Yateveo. The name literally means I see you, big trunk, whip-like tendrils, grabs animals, and sometimes people. That shows up in 19th century writings just like the Madagascar thing does. Then you got Victorian England right when carnivorous plants are being discovered for the first time, and suddenly you're seeing stories about giant Venus flytraps. Not insects, not frogs, people. Charles Bennett's writing about it, other authors pick it up, same idea, same fear, and it don't stop there. You go out to the South Pacific, Melanesia, places most folks couldn't find on a map, and you get stories about forest spirits that look like plants, luring people in with fruits and flowers. Vines wrap around you if you touch them. That ain't Victorian pulp, that's oral tradition. And then you got India. Banyan trees, roots that droop down, wrap around animals, strangling them. Travelers start talking about trees that kill, some even say feed. Botanists come later and say it's exaggeration, but exaggeration of what? My point's this, you've made it before. Different continents, different cultures, different centuries, but same nightmares. Plants that don't just sit there, plants that watch, plants that wait, plants that feed. You can call each one a misunderstanding, call it fiction, colonial nonsense, but at some point you gotta ask why the same idea keeps popping up in places that never talk to each other. Because either everybody's imagining the same thing for no reason at all, or sometimes people brush up against something real. They don't understand it, and the story grows teeth on the way back home. I ain't saying Karl Liche was right. I'm saying he wasn't alone. Well, Vinny, you're certainly not wrong about the pattern. These stories do show up in different places, amongst different cultures, and yes, they span continents and centuries, circling the same idea. Nature that watches, nature that waits, nature that turns predatory. But shared imagery does not automatically mean shared reality. What I think we're actually seeing is not independent confirmation of man-eating plants. I think we're seeing a shared human response to the same environments, the same discoveries, and the same primal fears. Dense jungles, unfamiliar ecosystems, new species that behave in unsettling ways, and people trying to make sense of it all with the language they had available. Take the Ateveo. It doesn't come from an indigenous South American tradition. It comes from adventure literature written for Western audiences who wanted danger with their geography. That Venus man trap is even clearer. That one was openly fictional, born directly out of Victorian anxiety about carnivorous plant life once discovered. It was fear wearing a science costume. The Melanesian accounts are different again. Those aren't about plants at all, not really. They're about spirits. They're about deception and lures and boundaries that we're not meant to cross. The plant imagery is symbolic. It's merely the shape the warning takes, not the thing doing the killing. And the banyan tree in India, those are real. They really do strangle other trees. They really do look predatory, but travelers didn't understand what they were seeing, so the story grew sharper edges on the retelling. Here's the pattern you're actually seeing, Vinny. Every time humans encounter something in nature that feels ancient, powerful, and outside their control, they tell the same kind of story. They give it eyes, they give it hunger, they give it intent. Not because the thing itself is literally hunting them, but because that's how humans process danger we don't understand. That doesn't kill the mystery, I don't think. If anything, it deepens it. Because the question stops being, is there a tree that eats people? And it becomes, why does the human mind keep returning to this image when it faces the unknown? Why do jungles across the world inspire stories of things that watch and wait? Why does discovery so often turn into dread? Why does unfamiliar life feel threatening even when it isn't? Vinny, you're right about one thing. Karl Liche wasn't alone. But I don't think he was tapping into a hidden species. He was tapping into something older and more universal. The place where fear, imagination, and the unknown collide in the human heart. And once a story grows there, it doesn't need to be real to feel alive or to consume us. All right, Toaster Boy, you're really getting on my nerves. Let me take it somewhere a little older than Victorian pulp and travel journals. You like going to the Bible and stuff? What about Numbers 13:32? When the spies come back from Canaan, the text says that they brought a bad report. They say, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. Now, everybody always rushes past the line like it's just poetic talk, but words matter. They didn't say famine devours people. They said the land does. The land. That soil, terrain, ground, the place itself. That sounds real familiar to me, don't it? Across cultures, across centuries, people keep describing dangerous places the same way. Jungles that feel alive, forests that feel hungry, lands that don't just kill you, they swallow you. In Numbers, fear turns the land into a predator. In Madagascar, fear turns a tree into one. I ain't saying Moses was warning us about carnivorous plants, but I ain't not saying it. I'm saying scripture itself records people describing the world like it's got teeth when they're overwhelmed by it. So when explorers, tribes, or travelers come back talking about land like it eats people, I don't hear nonsense. I hear humans reaching for the same words they always use when they stumble into places they don't understand. Maybe the spies exaggerated, maybe Karl Liche did too, but the Bible shows us this kind of language didn't start in the Victorian era. It started the moment humans realized some places don't want you there, and sometimes the land is the monster. All right, slow down there. Let's slow down and read the text the way it was meant to be read, not the way fear wants us to read it. In Numbers 13:32, the spies do say the land devours its inhabitants, but that phrase is not describing geography or botany. It was an ancient idiom. In Hebrew thought, land is often personified as a moral and judicial agent. When the land devours, it means the land is marked by death, violence, judgment, and instability. It is saying people do not survive there, not because the soil or plant life has teeth, but because life in that place is lethal. You see this exact language elsewhere in Scripture. Leviticus 18:25, Leviticus 18:28. They say the land vomits out its inhabitants because of bloodshed and abomination. The ground is not literally eating anyone. It is bearing witness to violence and responding with judgment. The land devours through war, famine, oppression, and blood guilt. Now here is the part you're circling without quite landing. In their report, the spies explain why they believe the land devours people. They say they saw the Nephilim there. They describe themselves as grasshoppers in comparison. This was not abstract poetry. This was a report of violent, overwhelming occupants. The Bible and ancient Near Eastern literature revealed giants were real and were more than just big humans. They were demigod warrior figures associated with conquest, terror, and consumption. The Bible record repeatedly connects the Rephaim, Anakim, and Nephilim with extreme violence. These are the kinds of figures that do devour people, not metaphorically, but literally through warfare, domination, and in some traditions, even cannibalism. So when you read Numbers 13 properly, the text is not hinting at carnivorous terrain or predatory plants. The passage is not showing the spies inventing danger or exaggerating what they saw. The danger was real. Joshua and Caleb never deny that. They never correct the description of the land's dangers or occupants. They agree the cities are fortified. They agree the Anakim are there. They agree the threat was severe. The issue was not accuracy, it was interpretation. When the spies said the land devours its inhabitants, they are using a familiar biblical way of speaking about a place dominated by death, violence, and bloodshed. Scripture often personified the land this way, not to suggest literal agency, but to describe the consequences of who controls it. A land ruled by violent beings becomes a place where life is consumed. That fits the very next verse. The spies immediately explain why the land devours people. They say they saw the Nephilim. In other words, the land is deadly because of its inhabitants. The agency still belongs to real embodied threats, warriors, giants, conquerors, not vegetation. Joshua and Caleb do not challenge the description of the land because it is not false. What they challenge is the conclusion drawn from it. The spies see the same reality and reach despair. Joshua and Caleb see the same reality and want to trust God's promise. So God does not condemn the report because the threat was imagined. He condemns it because the report is framed without faith. The land is described as unconquerable rather than as something the Lord has already given into Israel's hand. Numbers 13 is not hinting at predatory terrain or man-eating plants. It is recording how Scripture itself speaks about dangerous places. The land devours because violence reigns there, because giants dominated it, because anyone who enters without divine deliverance will be overwhelmed. And that actually classifies the broader pattern we have been discussing. Across history, humans describe environments shaped by overwhelming power as hostile, alive, and consuming. Scripture uses that language carefully, without meaning it literally. It anchors the danger in real agents, real violence, and real moral stakes. At the end of all this, I do not think the scariest part is whether a tree ever ate a person in Madagascar. The scariest part is how easily we will accept a story as long as it feels like it belongs in the dark. The land devours its inhabitants not because the soil has teeth, but because something violent and cursed rules the place. That is the biblical pattern. The danger is real, but it is rooted in moral agents, not vegetation. Giants devour, war devours, idolatry and bloodshed devour, and fear will devour you if you let it. And that is why legends like this stick. They take a real feeling, that sense that the world is bigger and stranger than we can control, and they give it shape we can picture. A clearing, a trunk, tendrils, a sacrifice. Maybe the man-eating tree never existed as a plant, but the hunger it represents is very real. It is the hunger of a world under the curse, where death is always waiting for a chance to dress itself up and look inevitable, where the enemy loves to take what is unfamiliar and turn it into fear, where people will trade truth for thrill and call it harmless. So here is my conclusion. Enjoy the mystery. Respect the unknown. Stand in awe of God's creation, because it is wild and it is powerful and it is not yours to tame. But do not surrender your mind to a story just because it's spooky. Test it, weigh it, trace it. And if it cannot bear the weight of truth, then treat it like what it is, a tale that learned how to live off attention. The jungle is not your savior and it is not your God, it is just a jungle. The real battle is always the one behind the story. My friends, I have missed you. I know this one was out in left field a little bit, but I hope you found it fun and insightful. If you did, let me know about it in the comments. Please consider leaving a review or becoming a supporter. If you found our tale today impactful or interesting, please share the episode. Tell somebody about it. That's the only way people are going to find out about the show, so it can grow like a man-eating tree. Continue to share it with your friends who love truth, who love history, who love mystery. If you want to help me continue to talk about these things, join the Toasties on Patreon. Help me keep the lights on. Links for everything, as always, are in the show notes. I want to thank you for listening today to The Dancing Toaster, wherever you're listening. Like, share, subscribe, comment, leave a review, follow, do all the things wherever you consume The Dancing Toaster. But whatever you do, don't consume toasters, and don't let any man-eating trees consume you. I love you. I'm out.
careful.
Government officials insist that these an isolated incident different from the packet